So we begin together with our opening reflections. We just bring ourselves together and be present to one another via Zoom. Hearts to be in touch of what is going to be offered to us today in the presentation. So we begin with the quote from Pope Francis. Everything is interconnected, and genuine care for our own lives and our relationships with nature are inseparable from fraternity, justice, and faithfulness to others. Pope Francis, Laudato Si. Just allow a couple of seconds to allow those words to speak to our hearts. From Father Chevalier, one with the universe. In the universe, a human being is the eye of all that does not see, the heart of all that does not feel, the tongue of all that remains mute. A human being is not only a mineral that blossoms, a shrub that feels, but an animal who prays, adores, and gives thanks. Again, couple of seconds to allow the words of Chevalier to speak to your heart. Glory and praise to you, Lord. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Kathy. And now I would like to present to you, dear friends, please mute yourselves. I'd like to present to you our speaker for today's session. Father J.R. Babor. His real name is Abondio Babor Jr. Was born in Masbate, the Philippines. Already in his early years in the formation, he showed brilliance of the mind. and uh, faithful attitude towards studies. So he was sent to Rome to do his graduate studies in moral theology, and he finished with a doctorate summa cum laude. And he came back and he's professor in our theological schools, and at the same time, Dean of Studies of the Sacred Heart Scholasticate, and the peritus of the bishops with regard to moral questions. Now, Father J.R. is assistant professor of the Loyola School of Theology. My dear friends, please welcome Father J.R. Babor.
Thank you for the introduction, Father Ben. I'm from Negros Oriental, not from Masbate. I'll share my screen. This is the presentation. So we have here these three topics that I'd like to bridge. No, these are three really interesting topics that we focus on this webinar conversation. The outline for the talk, I'll start with Laudato Si as the given flow, no, of the topics given by Corvite and Father Joel, and hopefully we can establish the points of convergence, no, between the three, with the common points, or point rather, major point that we can synthesize. And then the challenge, then open forum or sharing. It depends on the core Vite team in the procedure. So our time frame is 1:30 to 3:30. Just a recap so that we won't be lost where we are. We started with environmental scanning, sharing on country situations, and a synthesis on regional situation. This is very important because Laudato Si starts also with the methodology of seeing. I'll discuss it later. And then discerning the needs of the people and of creation from the perspective of the poor and the periphery. This part of the process, the procedure from environmental scanning to discern what do the poor and the people in the periphery uh, are in need of, and especially in connection to the crucial question of sustainability of creation. And then what was followed in August 18, so from June, July, August, um, the focus was what can we do as a response to genuine human needs and the groaning of creation in our country and region. Uh, the three topics presented by Corvite from June 14, July 21, and August 18. I think, and I suppose, it's very clear that it's seeing, judging, and acting. It's already talking about response in August 18. Uh, Father Ben Alforque was the one who gave this session or facilitated and gave the inputs. September 15, the act of reparation to the Sacred Heart of Jesus then and now, inspiration from Father George Chevalier. This is given by Father John Mankey. We know that the spirituality of reparation, or the act of reparation for that matter, to the Sacred Heart is part of the tradition that we have as a Chevalier family. Father Joel wrote and spoke about this. And we know that reparation is intertwined or intimately connected with the work of JPIC as we have understood it through and through, as regards interpreting of spirituality and charism. So reparation is a crucial point also of how we do justice and peace and reparation based on compassion and love. So for today, I'll be speaking about Laudato Si, our mission of JPIC, and the thoughts of Father George. Uh, of course, these topics are all connected to the previous ones. And let me start with Laudato Si. Laudato Si is basically about integral ecology. So that's the whole picture of what Laudato Si is, the encyclical. It is about interconnectedness of everything. And that in chapter 4, Pope Francis is illustrating it in a much clearer fashion. He says everything is closely related, and that today's problems call for a vision capable of taking into account every aspect of the global crisis. Now here, let me say that since we assume that we have understood this very well, that we're all interconnected,
Power
we mean
on.
that affect
Bluetooth
one
mode.
another. What we do, even the smallest things could have negative or positive effects. That's what we mean by interconnectedness. So I just want to illustrate this in a concrete manner. So for example, if we throw a small candy wrapper on the street, the candy wrapper could clog the canal on a rainy day. When the canal is clogged, the street would be flooded. When the street is flooded, there's the danger of leptospirosis, the urine that comes from rats. A neighbor who may have a small wound on his or her foot wading through the flooded street could die of leptospirosis. He or she would be infected with it. So see, the small act of throwing away a candy wrapper could have a tremendous effect, no, on others. That's how we are connected really. And the other example, this one is the crucial part of the environmental discourse. If we cut the trees in our neighborhood, for example, and replace it with concrete cement, there will be no more trees to recycle carbon dioxide coming from motor vehicles, cars, some appliances, etc. So trees absorb carbon dioxide and turn it into oxygen. So oxygen in the air is what we breathe in to make our body alive. So without trees, we'll be breathing in polluted air and our body could suffer. That, without being too simplistic, is the simple message of Laudato Si. It is about interconnectedness, this integral ecology. So it means that all that exists on this planet are interdependent and interconnected. Since we depend on one another, plants, animals, human beings on this earth, the encyclical reminds all of us to take care of the earth, our common home. Uh, there are two models we find in Laudato Si: stewardship and kinship. These two are contrasted against the Dominion model, which was criticized. Of course, we know, all of us know that that is not the model that we see now in terms of sustainability or integrity of creation. So stewardship focuses on the significant role of human beings as caretakers of God's creation. This is pointed out throughout the encyclical. However, kinship is what also Pope Francis emphasized very well, in the encyclical, that human beings are not the only significant species in the planet. All other organisms have inherent value. Inherent value meaning that the value of other species, their value doesn't depend on human beings attributing values. So for example, if the tree is regarded as a value in itself, then we should not cut the tree for another purpose. In other words, what we are speaking here is a greater ecosystem in which the human being can locate oneself. That's kinship. In other words, we are related to one another. Now, in the encyclical, this title, Laudato Si, as we know, it means praise be to you, but it is coming from the medieval Italian. It is the second encyclical of Pope Francis, and the subtitle is on care for our common home. Um, Actually, much of what Pope Francis says in the document in Laudato Si is not totally new. He cites his predecessors extensively. Paul the Sixth, John Paul the Second, and Benedict the 16th. And that we can locate Laudato Si here as a part of the process of discernment of the magisterium since Vatican II and the Episcopal conferences. We have our own document in the Philippines, what happened to our beautiful land, and other conferences in the world, and ecumenical perspectives like the Orthodox views on the environment and ecology. Then we have the magisterial teachings on the environment starting from John 23rd up to Francis. And this is directed towards the summits that were being projected after Laudato Si was issued in June 2015. The Paris Agreement was in December 2015. And this Laudato Si was thought of a document that could influence the thinking of the leaders. We'll talk about that as we go along in the document. Now, John Paul II called this environmental crisis as a moral one. In other words, it is not just about other aspects, economic, social, political, and other things, but it's primarily a moral one. That is his message in the year 1990, January 1, to be precise, the World Day of Prayer. Now, before discussing the contents of the encyclical, we need to know how it is organized. I've mentioned already the methodology that I saw in the process now of the presentation of topics here in Corvite. Laudato Si, as other social encyclicals do in terms of using methodologies, uh, these social encyclicals use the See Judge Act. Now here, in reading a book or a document like this encyclical, which is used as a teaching tool, we need to know the method or style it uses so that you can easily follow and grasp what it tries to teach us. So the encyclical is divided into 6 chapters. Chapter 1 uses the see technique. It invites us to see what is happening to our common home. It urges us to look, to open our eyes to what is happening around us, the environmental destruction taking place, not just locally, but globally as well. So the 3 succeeding chapters 2, 3, 4, use the judge approach. It summons us to assess and weigh where we have failed in our responsibility to care for the earth. And the last 2 chapters, 5 and 6, use the act technique. After seeing and judging, the encyclical urges us to act and to do our part in caring for one another and the earth, our common home. So we see here that there is a critical narrative in seeing. It's not just plain noticing of what is happening, but using a particular lens. And that it's a critical narrative because it provokes no, a reflection, our understanding of the world. And then we have the praxis analysis in judging and acting. What is the best thing to do to move forward? So here, we'll start with chapter 1. What is happening to our common home? So here the encyclical calls the planet our common home. So our home is where we live or stay to nourish our well-being and the place we belong to. If our home could not anymore be a place to nourish our life, we would have a big problem. So why is it called common home? It is common because the earth was created by God, not just for one person, for one nation, but for all of humanity and other species. So here, what is happening to our common home is something that we need to see with much attention. The encyclical points out that in our common home, the earth, there is pollution, waste and throwaway culture, climate change, water crisis, loss of biodiversity, decline in quality of human life, and the breakdown of society and global inequality. The enumeration of environmental problems makes us see that life and survival are at stake, especially for the poor people. May I mention at this point that this is the uh, point of convergence, no, in Laudato Si, in our work for justice and peace and the thoughts of our founder, Father George. The specific emphasis on uh, how the poor people suffer from these problems of world. So it is the poor people who suffer much from, for example, pollution. They don't have the luxury of going to the forested area like in a luxury place. So for example, in here in the Philippines, in Tagaytay, to breathe fresh air. They are working in factories in Manila or somewhere else to provide for their daily needs. So another example is the poor community living near the rivers. For example, here in Metro Manila, we have the Marikina River. These poor people don't have another house somewhere else like Baguio or Tagaytay again. These are places that are safe from flooding to escape from the flood during the rainy season. And the dumping areas of waste are mostly found in poor communities. Now here, these problems really are very real in an eyes, especially as we live in the urban areas in Metro Manila. And that of the integrated environmental problems in the encyclical, climate change is considered the most critical and at the same time controversial. So the encyclical emphasizes climate change is a global problem with grave implications, environmental, social, economic, political, and for the distribution of goods. It represents one of the principal challenges facing humanity in our day. Its worst impact will probably be felt by developing countries in coming decades. Many of the poor, again, there's a mention of the poor here, live in areas particularly affected by the phenomena related to warming. And Pope Francis just issued this declaration on climate emergency in 25 2019. And it's an ongoing really challenge because uh, if the well-off communities or rich people would be affected, like what happened to Belgium and other countries in Europe. And here in Asia, we saw the middle part of China recently, just as this year. And it doesn't only affect one sector or one population, but practically everyone. In other words, here, the Pope Francis is calling for that uh, radical energy transition because the climate crisis is saying is demanding us to find a way how to make use of our time because time is running out and decisive action is needed. And he urges everyone, especially business leaders, because they are the ones in the position of influence, and not just for, of course, for one sector, but for all of humanity for that matter. Now here, the projected results of climate change, the most serious ones, are the melting of ice caps and the accompanying rise of seawater level. It is projected that millions of people will be affected and there will be hundreds of millions of environmental refugees because many island countries like Kiribati, Maldives will be submerged and flooding will become more severe. The strength and frequency of typhoon and hurricanes will also intensify due to the increased warming of ocean's surface, especially those that I've mentioned a while ago. And then what the encyclical specifically mentioned here is on water. It's focused on water. Of course, we know that the here water, air, and land are essential elements for life to thrive. However, here access to safe drinkable water is a basic universal human right, since it is essential to human survival and as such is a condition for the exercise of other human rights. So to deprive the poor of access to water means to deny the right to a life consistent with their inalienable dignity. Why is it so important? Um, well, we can illustrate this by saying that we can do fasting for a number of days, say a week, without eating food, like what and we can survive. But we cannot survive for 3 days or more without drinking water. Water is life. Our body is made up of 70% water, although others have more water than, I'm just joking. Others are more obese. The planet is composed by more or less 70% of water. It's interesting. This 70% is true to all that exists in the planet. And that's how it is. So that's how God designed creation. So to have drinkable water is a basic human right because not to be provided with it is deprivation of our inalienable dignity. We would die without water faster than not eating food. That's how it is being illustrated. Now here, pollutants and toxic materials are other serious problems because these are emitted into the air and these are washed out into the waterways that contaminate the food chain. And these put the survival of different types of living organisms at risk. So different species of animals and plants are in danger of extinction due to these factors and others like drought and deforestation. The technology of genetic alteration by recombination, which is used to create new and diverse organisms, as mentioned by encyclical, may also pose a lot of problems to biological diversity. At the present time, the diversity of biological life is declining. So variety of natural resources is fast depleted. And then on the other problems like global inequality, the encyclical mentions about an ecological debts. It says that with the problem of climate change, there are differentiated responsibilities. And that of the developed countries is greater. So what is the meaning of that? It means that the developed countries, countries that are highly industrialized or industrialized, have the bigger responsibility of that debt to the environment than the developing or poor countries because the industrialized countries started emitting greenhouse gases since the start of the industrial revolution in the 19th century. So that's how far these highly developed countries have started and continued to emit greenhouse gases that cause climate change and global warming. So thus the developed countries compared to the developing countries have more responsibility in addressing the problem of climate change. But of course, it should not be the alibi. All of us who are in the developing world, developing countries from taking responsibility. And this chapter specifically points out that carbon footprint of the developed countries is much higher than developing ones. So that's the meaning of differentiated responsibility. And Pope Francis had been calling for these highly developed countries to start addressing these problems of using the non-renewable sources of energy into renewable ones, and that also they have the responsibility to help developing countries shift, no, to the renewable sources of energy. And here, this chapter ends with a disparate note because considering the seriousness of the environmental problems, there are only weak responses so far. So Pope Francis said that we still lack the culture needed to confront the crisis. No observable change of harmful habits of consumption. So it's like saying uh, we continue on. Although we know that we are going nowhere in terms of sustainability. And that we kind of blind ourselves, trying not to see them, trying not to acknowledge them, delaying the important decisions and pretending that nothing will happen. So in other words, all of us have not met God's expectations to take care of our common home. Now in chapter 2, this is titled the Gospel of Creation. It uses the Judge method. We are invited to look at our common home from the eyes of our Christian faith. It teaches us what it means to be human as part of God's plan in creation. It offers biblical texts that give a complete view of our tremendous responsibility. For God's creation, the deep connection among all of us, and the fact that the natural environment is a collective good, the patrimony of all humanity, and the responsibility of everyone. And the story of creation is given emphasis in this chapter because it is central in understanding the relationship between us, human beings, and other creatures, and how sin, our wrongdoings, had broken the balance of everything that God had created. It notes human life is grounded in three basic and closely interconnected relationships with God, with our neighbor, and with the earth itself. According to the Bible, these three vital relationships have been broken both outwardly and within us. And this rupture is called sin. So this is sin. The harmony between the creator, humanity, and creation as a whole was disrupted by our presuming to take the place of God and refusing to acknowledge our creaturely limitations. This section of the encyclical is very interesting. It pricks our conscience. We thought we can do everything we want. We thought we can just cut trees freely for economic profit, slaughter animals without restraint to our appetites, and make use of the resources of the earth without thinking of the consequences. But no, the encyclical tells us we are not God. The earth was here before us, and it has been given to us. It's one way of saying we are not the owners of the earth, so we don't have the right to do whatever we want. In this understanding, our relationship with the earth should be based on the idea of stewardship or administration. And as I mentioned earlier, this is the model that is presented in this encyclical. Not power and unlimited rule, but what is it to be a steward? It's about taking care of the earth, not plundering it according to our greed and selfish desires. And this is what Laudato Si is saying, that we Christians have at times incorrectly interpreted the scriptures. Nowadays, we must forcefully reject the notion that our being created in God's image and given dominion over the earth justifies absolute domination over other creatures. So on this point, the encyclical clearly states every act of cruelty towards any creature is contrary to human dignity. But the encyclical is quick to point out that the human being can't be equated to other animals or plants or anything that exists in this planet. Every human has unique worth because every human being is created in the image and likeness of God, and he or she has the tremendous responsibility for the earth, because only the human being knows the difference between what is good and bad due to his or her gift of reason. So here, with the gift of reason, we need to train our heart and mind to see God, the creator, present in his creation. That's why this chapter ends with a central claim of Christian revelation. The earthly Jesus, with his tangible and loving relationship with the world, is risen and glorious, and is present throughout creation by his universal lordship. And then in chapter 3, the human roots of the ecological crisis, this chapter uses the judge method. So this is the start of the also the way to illustrate how the lens of judging had been continued. But this is a start where the anthropocentric analysis comes in. Anthropocentric is referring to the human factor. So we see here that the things we do, especially our economic activities, have negative effects on the planet and our brothers and sisters who are poor. Our "we don't care" attitude resulted to the environmental problems we are facing. Sadly, it's the poor who suffer the most of the effects of the environmental problems, as pointed out earlier. While it is true that science and technology have improved the quality of our lives and give us convenience in many ways, these also cause various distractions. So the encyclical opens our minds specifically to the truth that technology has become instrumental in the destruction of the environment and the exploitation of people, especially the poor who have no power to defend themselves against mining, logging, etc. This is the tribe that lives there in that place, and you can just imagine how dislocated they are. When we don't feel the pain of other people, it's hard to also talk about the pain of the exploited earth. That is the point of the encyclical. So in our time, we have become too focused on ourselves. It can be likened to our selfie generation that is centered on individualistic consumption. We no longer pay much attention to the beauty of the earth around us and the people who suffer because we are absorbed in our single-minded pursuit for material possession. The encyclical in this chapter calls us to practice solidarity and to protect the common good, the earth. Economic development is good, but it should not destroy what God has created for everyone. So in this sense, economic development has to be transformed into integral human development, meaning it should be for the good of the whole person, not just one aspect like economic, and it should be for everybody. So it's sad to see that science and technology, instead of this being used to provide what is good for all, have become means to gain more economic profit and material wealth for the few. In the world today, only a few rich countries and only a few people possess the wealth of the earth. That is very true, for example, in the Philippines and anywhere. The unequal distribution is facilitated by the prevailing profit-oriented capitalist economic system we have today. The desire for economic profit has become the rule. Technology has become the instrument to gain more economic profit. The market for consumption it creates conditions are mined to buy and buy. This is what the encyclical calls the culture of overconsumption and a wasteful culture. If we buy and buy, we also throw and throw because we want to only keep what we like, especially those that are useful, referring to a status symbol or anything, not what we need. So the market economy has created so much human wants, not needs. According to Pope Francis, we have a use and throw away culture that makes us practice every type of waste, environmental or human. That is why Pope Francis points out that what is happening is not only environmental exploitation, but sexual exploitation of children, abandonment of the elderly, forcing others into slavery, human trafficking, and throwing away unborn babies because they do not correspond to what the parents want, or of selling blood diamonds and the skins of animals in danger of extinction, and buying the organs of the poor for resale. And this the so-called utilitarian attitude, meaning looking at the environment and people as sources of profit and exploitation, and which is the root of the environmental and social crisis we have today. And here in chapter 4, the title is Integral Ecology, which I think really captures the whole of the spirit of the book. As I mentioned earlier, this is focused on the theme of interconnectedness. So in this chapter, Pope Francis stresses that everything is interconnected. Ecology is integral. It means ecology includes everything that exists in the environment, society, culture, economic, political, moral, and spiritual aspects. Therefore, to take care of our common home is not only for us in the present generation, but especially for the generations to come, because we are interconnected. So with the Judge's method on this chapter, the encyclical emphasizes that interconnectedness should be reflected in the way we live our own lives, cooperating with God's design in our relationship with one another and with the earth. An integral ecology demands practice of daily habits in taking care of our common home, because nature cannot be regarded as something separate from ourselves or as mere setting in which we live. We are part of nature, and nature is part of us. And in fact, the claim that we are part of nature could be deepened by the basic conviction that we are nature ourselves. We are not only part in truth, but we are nature. So here the environment, people, and all other species compose the whole system of the earth. If we do something bad to one, it will affect the other, as I mentioned about the candy wrapper or the cutting of a tree. Pope Francis says that we are not faced with two different or separate crises, one environmental and the other social, but rather one complex crisis, which is both social and environmental. The Pope points out that the analysis of the environmental problems cannot be separated from the analysis of human family and work-related and local contexts and how individuals relate to themselves. It is the focus in this chapter that to care for one another and our common home involves every aspect of our community life. So the Pope gives specific attention to the urban environment, on human ecology. The human being has a great capacity for adaptation, and an admirable creativity and generosity is shown by persons and groups who respond to environmental limitations. By alleviating the adverse effects of their surroundings and learning to live productively amid disorder and uncertainty. But there are still many things to be done. A great deal of integral improvement in the quality of human life, public space, housing, transport, etc., is still needed in order to achieve authentic or integral development, not just economic development. So the encyclical explains that human ecology is inseparable from the notion of the common good, and it has to be understood in a concrete way. So in today's context in which injustices abound and growing numbers of people are deprived of basic human rights and considered expendable, committing oneself to the common good means to make choices in solidarity based on a preferential option for the poorest of our brothers and sisters. In other words, this is the best way to hand over a sustainable environment or planet for the future generations, and especially by committing ourselves to care for the underprivileged members of our society. So here, the tremendous task of doing mission on JPIC is before us, as illustrated by Laudato Si. In chapter 5, this uses already the methodology of action. So just a recap, the See Judge Act is the methodology we started seeing in chapter 1 and 2, 3, 4, judging, and 5 and 6, acting. So in this regard, the Pope is calling for lines of action and approaches. So the method used here invites us to make concrete what we believe is the right path to move forward. Pope Francis moves from analysis to proposals for action. Analysis are not enough. So what are needed are proposals for dialogue and action that must involve each of us individually and socially or communally. The encyclical lays out the political and cultural responses that are possible. The chapter outlines some major paths of dialogue and probable practical solutions in addressing environmental deterioration. For example, the Pope states that more needs to be done in conserving energy and natural resources. The use of fossil fuels needs to be replaced with cleaner and more sustainable options, like the renewable sources of energy. And businesses need to undertake an assessment of environmental impact before proceeding on any undertaking. What is being made obvious in this chapter is the need of the community to have good leaders who can effectively respond to the climate crisis and the problems people face, especially the poor and the underprivileged. This is very important for us in the Philippines at this time because we'll be having the national elections. And as a province, we are undergoing the process of discernment, circles of discernment, and coming out with a particular view of what we think would be consistent with our vision, the common good, leaders who can promote these values of common good and solidarity, especially in addressing the needs of the poor and the underprivileged. We can't anymore do business as usual or of short-term politics and not think of future generations. We need norms and regulations to moderate the economy and our relationship with the environment. So the most significant appeal is addressed to those who hold political office, calling them to avoid the mindset of short-term gain and results which dominates present-day economics and politics. So the Pope is appealing for principled and responsible kind of politics. He says, if they're courageous, meaning these political leaders and all of us who put them into their particular positions, they will attest to their God-given dignity and leave behind a testimony of selfless responsibility. So on this basis, Pope Francis is not afraid to criticize what world leaders have done so far. He says, recent world summits on the environment have failed to live up to expectations because due to lack of political will, they were unable to reach truly meaningful and effective global agreements on the environment. As he asks earlier in the encyclical, what would induce anyone at this stage to hold on to power only to be remembered for their inability to take action when it was urgent and necessary to do so. So in this chapter, Pope Francis insists on honest and transparent decision-making processes in order to discern which policies and business initiatives can bring about genuine integral development. He asks that it is necessary that practical proposals are not developed in an ideological or superficial way. So for this, dialogue is essential, a term present in the title of every section of this chapter. There are certain environmental issues where it is not easy to achieve a broad consensus, and the church does not presume to settle specific questions or to replace politics. So the Pope emphasizes, I want to encourage an honest and open debate so that particular interests or ideologies will not prejudice the common good. And sadly, of course, what we have at the moment is the pandemic, and often it has become the tool for many who are in positions of power to further divide, the have and have-nots. And in fact, here we are facing again, no, with the issues of injustice, with the corruption allegations, and that this chapter specifically addresses these existing problems, the social and environmental nature, and it requires the common effort. Now, connecting to the problems of the pandemic is indeed, again, the poor that they suffer a lot. We can do much if we are open to one another, as the Pope is saying here. There is emphasis on dialogue. We don't stop learning from each other, even uh, looking at the face of evil. That confronting evil will eventually lead to conversion of hearts. And we continue to build bridges that connect us. And after all, he says in this chapter, we live in one common home. So here, this common effort is indeed the focus, no, of the humanity's vision of what it is to be in the stewards, as in the principle of stewardship and kinship, that we belong to one another. We have one home, this planet, and that everyone is inspired or should be inspired and encouraged to contribute his or her part. Now, in chapter 6, this is entitled Ecological Education and Spirituality. And continuing the ACT method, Pope Francis talks about educational and spiritual responses. So he says very clearly that laws, policies are useless if they are not accompanied by a change of values and lifestyle. So in this chapter, the Pope stresses the importance of ecological conversion. So this refers to a deep-rooted change in our way of life. It means that we should move beyond the prevailing culture of overconsumption, of self-centeredness, to a simpler and more selfless way of living. So the encyclical states that the roots of the environmental and crucial, this is a crucial point in stressing these roots, and the social crisis are deep, and it is not easy to reshape our habits and behavior. So we admit that it's not an overnight process. It is gradual. But education is the key. So in this encyclical, Pope Francis emphasized that change is impossible without motivation and a process of education. Therefore, all educational sectors have to be involved especially us in the Shibali family. We have our educational institutions. And the Pope is saying that at school or even in families, those who are working in different ministries or in the media, catechesis, and elsewhere, this process of education should be done to facilitate ecological conversion. So, what is primarily the intention or the primary intention of education for ecological conversion? So its intention is to aim for a new lifestyle, which should be able to affect actions and daily habits concretely, like reduction of water consumption, sorting of wastes, and even turning off unnecessary lights, or even the use of water. So one particular example that I've heard from many groups, every time we talk about this, one is saying, if you take shower for 1 hour, make it 15 minutes, or just uh, use few drops of water. Now that's already in the extreme. But what is pointed out here is that we should have a simple lifestyle, no? Especially looking at our daily habits. If there are lights that are on and nobody is using those, then we have the moral duty to put them off because we would be wasting energy. So these are concrete examples, and we can think of many other examples here, especially our conference in the province who are doing already concrete acts, like eco breaking, uh, bokashi, and other ways. Ecological education is practicing integral ecology in our simple daily gestures, which break the logic of violence, exploitation, and selfishness. Ecological education is a lifelong task, but everything will be easier if we start with faith. So here, the Pope is going back to the fundamental basis of our commitment to integral ecology, and that is faith, our relationship with God. And this gives us a contemplative outlook in how we see our relationship with one another and the environment. Pope Francis says, as believers, we do not look at the world from without, but from within, conscious of the bonds with which the Father has linked us with all beings by developing our individual, God given capacities. An ecological conversion can inspire us to greater creativity and enthusiasm in resolving the world's problems and in offering ourselves to God. So in this part of the discourse, he is saying that our justice, peace, and integrity of creation efforts should all be centered and directed to God, not only to ourselves or to the world, to society. Otherwise, we would become social workers. So from there, from Laudato Si, we now proceed to our mission of JPIC. This have been discussed, I'm sure, by Father Ben in the earlier presentations, and also touched by Father John Mangay on reparation. So we'll just put the argument or the reflection in this way, that ours is a missionary spirituality. It is mission that defines us as active, apostolic, religious. Mission is not an option for us. It is the way in which we as Shibali family do our part, our ministry. And today we find ourselves in a variety of challenges in view of justice and peace and integrity of creation. We do not live for ourselves. Our life is defined by our interaction with others, not only in community, but above all, on the mission. This thoughts come from Instrumentum Laboris, no, for the 25th Emission General Chapter in 2017. It is very clear that our work for JPIC is integral to our charism and our spirituality. Now here, the point of convergence in Laudato Si and on JPIC, if we try to establish the bridge here, Pope Francis in Laudato Si advises us to view reality from the periphery. He was always talking about the poor and not from the center in the light of the gospel. This is taken from Evangelii Gaudium. Why inspired by our founder, Jules Chevalier, when he said, from the love of his heart comes the infinite mercy that Jesus shows toward sinners, and that tender compassion for those who suffer. Now, in Father Chevalier's thoughts, uh, Sister Kathy in the opening prayer mentioned already some quotes from our founder. I'd like to bring in other thoughts of the founder in this matter. Uh, Father Founder is saying that already in matter, there is a sort of knowledge, a beginning of love in the atmosphere and in the water. These thousands of varieties of animals know one another, love one another. A first draft, a first outline, perfect in itself, wonderful, entrancing, but only a distant sketch, a long way, unfortunately, from its model. Laudato Si and our work for JPIC, specifically, the centers our commitment for those um, on justice, peace, and integrative creation, on love and compassion. So God created everything in love, but sin entered in, and where sin entered in, the model that God envisioned for the world had been challenged by the use of human freedom in the wrong way. So what results is injustice and uh, other dehumanizing situations that we find in the world today. Yet here, Father Jules is saying that the heart of God descends in haste to his creation with the weight of an infinite love, and the heart of creation rises towards God, drawn by an attraction that dominates all others in it. In Laudato Si chapter 2, we have the emphasis on Jesus as uh, one who will rule at the end, his universal lordship. Because when sin entered, his grace came through his incarnation. And that's central to the writings of the founder. And through the incarnation of the Lord, we have uh, a sure path. Sure, because Jesus reveals himself as the way, the truth, and the life through his heart, his compassion. And that um, we realize that our wrongdoings are not consistent with that universal vision of God's reign, where there is justice, where there is common good, where there is harmony, where there is equality, where there is fraternity. And Pope Francis even wrote the latest encyclical on Fratelli Tutti. We are all brothers and sisters to one another because God has become one of us. He descended in haste with all to all of creation and dwells. He dwelt among us and continues to dwell within us. And the founder continues by saying, from the heart of the incarnate word, pierced on Calvary, I see a new world emerging. Laudato Si specifically talks about hope, specifically talks about the common home that can be shaped and redeemed through our commitment for solidarity and common good. It's something that we see also in our JPIC ministry, that it is a testimony of hope, that there would be a new world emerging from the woundedness of what is happening in the world, and especially in our time with this pandemic, where there uh, is so much discrepancy between the have and the have-nots, between those who are in the position of power and those who are powerless, those who are voiceless, and those who exploit. So what we witness here in the three topics that we focus on as the points of our reflection is the raging hope of a new world transformed in the love of God. Laudato Si specifically talks about that in uh, ecological conversion. When there is conversion, there is a turning away from dysfunctions toward the vision of the future that is redeemed by God, and that we have all the responsibilities to nurture that hope toward the vision that will be living in the fullness of life. And Father Jules is saying that would not would that we fully understood the sublimity of the ministry given us. And he kept on saying, uh, especially true in our constitutions and statutes in the MSC, and of course for the whole Shibali family, that in the poor and the little ones we find the face of Christ. And yes, this motto, may the Sacred Heart of Jesus be everywhere loved. Our Lord Jesus Christ has opened his heart to the world in order to bring an effective remedy to modern societies that are rushing into an abyss. That's the chapter 1 of Laudato Si. Now, if we do uh, if continue to do where this destruction is leading us, then we'll be rushing into the abyss. But we have that remedy revealed in the heart of Jesus, which also impels us to work for social transformation in justice, peace, and integrity of creation ministry. And Father Jules says that we are sent to be the instruments of this remedy to the world. And in a constant effort to share in the sentiments of the heart of Christ, you will be attentive to all human needs and aspirations, such as the need to be respected as persons, the need for love and peace, for freedom, justice, and truth, and the search for meaning in life. Will become all things to all people by respecting different cultures and by being ready to undertake whatever apostolic services people may need. And we find that in the MSC Constitutions number 24, inspired by the writings of the founder. So here, both Father Jules, Father Chevalier, and Pope Francis present the way we carry out our mission, especially regarding justice, peace, and integrity of creation as our ministry. And to have this synthesis, we can say that to have an intimate relationship, devotion to the person of Jesus. Of course, we understand that this devotion is our spirituality. It talks about the whole of ourselves. It talks about our relationship with God as the one who sends us as Shibali family, bearing fruit in our personal and pastoral life, in our justice, peace, and integrity of creation efforts, and our social relationships as embodied in the spirituality of the heart and radiating to the rest of creation in Laudato Si. Now here, this is a challenge that I'd like to bring in the plan of action, thinking globally and acting locally. What can we as Shibali family or as individuals do about the challenges of JPIC, in the light of Laudato Si and Father Joel's vision? Um, that's all my presentation, and um, I'm very interested also, of course, listen to what is happening in other entities, of the Shibali family. That's why I put there, if you have open forum or a sharing this at this moment, so that it will be more enriching, to all of us. And I hope that I was able to bridge the three topics given, um, considering the time that we have, uh, uh, trying to make sense, of what the documents are telling us in view of our concrete circumstances as Shibali family. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Father JR. That was very profound, and for guiding us through the document in the light of our spirituality of the heart and inspirations from the founder. Um, you mentioned something like you interested to gather feedback. Would you want us to go first to personal and group discussions, and then they will share with you the feedback, and then you can comment?
That would be nice, Father Ben.
Yeah, okay. So we will have a 5 minutes of personal reflection on the question which Father JR uh, presented a while ago, focusing on what we can do, but really absorb the input that he has on Laudato Si, our spirituality of the heart, and what can we really do. And after that, we will go to Zoom rooms for group sharing. And the personal reflection starts now.